Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys about something that's a little bit comical, and it's because people misrepresent something. And look, I'm a strength guy. I'm predisposed to be biased in favor of the progressive overload model of muscle growth. And even I admit, look, training volume, or at least effective volume, obviously combined with proper recovery and programming and all that, seems to be the primary driver of muscle growth. I'm actually not in denial of that fact. In other words, if you do a number of quality reps, even if it's 10 rep sets, and they are all within one rep of failure, or even maybe possibly two momentary failure, and they directly hit a muscle, the muscles you're trying to target, muscle or muscles, and you do 5 sets of that, you are probably going to stimulate a pretty significant growth response, irrespective of the weight on the bar. Okay? Irrespective of how much weight was actually used for you as an individual. That's actually true. And I agree with that. And I think the evidence does point to that. I think the evidence is relatively clear in regards to that. Now, just because of that, people will then come up with this ludicrous concept that, well, the weight on the bar doesn't matter. Progressive overload doesn't matter. And the whole story of Milo of Croton and the bull that we've been fed for 3,500 years, okay, 2,500 technically, by the ancient Greeks isn't really based on reality. But the thing is, it is. It is. Tension still matters for fatigue generation. Okay, because we're still dealing with our relative workloads. Now, I'm also one of those people who will say that, look, we should get as strong as possible with the lightest weight possible sometimes. And I say that as a strength athlete. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if we can create the same peak tension on our spinal erectors, thoracic erectors, hamstrings, glutes, using a good morning with 50% of the weight that we would do with a Romanian deadlift for the same movement pattern, well, it would make sense to do the good morning with 50% of the weight if you're trying to build those muscles. Why? You're going to recover easier. You can do more sets. You can do more volume, more training, more effective volume that you can recover from, and that's what it would allow you to do. Probably going to equal more muscle growth. Okay, that seems to be a reality. So the problem is that when people jump up and say, aha, so then strength doesn't matter, weight on the bar doesn't matter. Well, that's an extremely impractical perspective. Very impractical. I'm not going to get into the nuanced topic of very heavy weights possibly being a requirement to hypertrophy specific fibers. I've seen Knuckles suggest some pretty good data on that you might actually only get 90 to 95% of your potential growth if you don't do any weights that are above 90% of your 1 rep max. Okay? You will have some upper threshold fibers that are not capable of being fatigued with 8 or 10 rep sets to failure, that you can't actually fully fatigue those fibers. Okay, that matters. That might matter. Again, if you're trying to get every last drop of growth. Now, of course, I would also look at someone and say, if you don't care about being strong, you're a damn pussy. That would also be my response. But even for the strength athlete, we have to remember that we need the hypertrophy to get bigger. We do need it. So we can't disregard the hypertrophy aspect of training. If we do, we are not going to have the heaviest squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, whatever that we want. Okay, because strength is a side effect of hypertrophy. It is, or at least strength potential is. Okay, a bigger muscle has more strength potential, period. End of story. The evidence is overwhelming for this. So in light of that, we care, but let's come over to the point, the practical aspect of it. What are you going to do? Do limitless reps to fatigue forever? In other words, let's say you get up to an exercise to where you can do 10 sets with 135 and you're pretty much hitting failure. Right? You try to do multiple sets of that and you can't even do a 4th set of 10, right? You're hitting like 8 reps. And you continue to get stronger at the reps. Why? Because you're gaining muscle, because you're doing limit sets, you're getting enough training volume. And notice I didn't name an exercise. It could be a exercise that any weak person could get to 135, or it could be an exercise that's really hard to get to 135. You know what? Standing presses with 135 for 10, yeah, I can do it. A whole lot of people can't. Strict good mornings 135. A lot of people can't do that. Right? So it doesn't matter what exercise it is. 135 pounds. What are you going to do? You're going to just rep it forever? In other words, what happens when it becomes your 12 rep max? You're just going to add more volume, right? I'm going to do sets of 12. Keep getting bigger. Well, what happens when it becomes your 15 rep max? Are you never going to do anything less than 15 reps? Or 20 reps? Then what are you going to do? Add another set. You're going to do 5 sets of 20. Well, I do that with good mornings, actually. But what are you going to do? 5 sets of 20 with it? Okay, well, what happens when you keep growing? Are you going to do 22 rep sets, 25 rep sets, 30 rep sets? Going to add a 6 set and do 6 sets of 30? We get to a point to where this gets ridiculous. It becomes stupid. It becomes moronic. So when we get to this point, it becomes impractical to not add weight. Furthermore, there is some evidence, and I'm not saying there's conclusive evidence by any stretch of the imagination. There is data in support of the idea that relatively lower reps, and I'm talking 10 reps or less, may cause a superior form of hypertrophy, a more lasting form of hypertrophy, that it may shift the ratio of myofibrillar to sarcoplasmic growth. Now, for a guy who's just trying to get big, that may not matter. But we know that growth seems to last longer when you detrain. You can keep it longer, you keep it easier. Now, I'm not saying that is a fact. I'm saying there are some legitimate experts and researchers who've postulated it, and they have some data to support it. So if that's the case, it doesn't make sense to just do endless reps, because we're getting back over to the point of, well, maybe tension does matter up to a point. Tension does matter up to a point. Even if the volume and the effective volume is a primary driver, looking at different types of hypertrophy. And it's so much so that, again, there's other experts, like Dr. Mike, who suggested if you want to get big as possible that you absolutely need to train multiple rep ranges. Well, if you need to train multiple rep ranges to squeeze out the most growth possible because there's slightly different anabolic pathways through these rep ranges, we're coming back down to tension and weight on the bar mattering. Because as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you're going to have to just keep adding reps to get the same rate of perceived exertion, to reach muscle failure, to reach the same RPE with that same weight. You're going to have to do more and more reps with it. Well, if different rep ranges have the potential for slightly different anabolic pathways, then you're going to have to go a lot heavier. You're going to have to lift heavy at some point in there. So you go back to that 135 scenario, you can't just keep lifting 135. You are going to have to do some work with 225, 250, maybe 300. Even if you're doing 25 and 30 rep sets with the 135, you're going to have to do it from a practical perspective if you're trying to squeeze out every drop of muscle growth. Okay? Now, come back over to the guys who aren't as concerned about that. They just want to get as strong as possible. Well, you better get as jacked as possible if you want to get as strong as possible. Okay? You don't think the size of your pecs and triceps affects your bench press? You don't think the size of your quads and glutes affects your squat? Overwhelming amount of research says that they do. In a very proportionate way for people who actually practice maxes. So you can set aside the guys who don't do maxes. When you start talking about competitive powerlifters, I've seen experts suggest that based upon the data they've seen, that you could probably take the guys at a meet and run them through a DEXA scan and predict ahead of time how they're all going to place based upon their bone structure, arm and leg lengths, and how much muscle they have. Okay? Relative to those moment arms. Well, yeah, it's going to matter. I think the size of your erectors and your hamstrings and your traps and your glutes affects your max deadlift. It does. So you guys better care about your size also. So at the end of the day, most of us are here trying to maximize size. Okay, I don't care what your goals. I don't care whether you're in my end, you're in the strength world, or you're the guys chasing the hypertrophies. I'm trying to maximize size. And even if volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy, and I agree that it largely appears to be, tension has an extremely practical factor here. It does. Weight on the bar is still going to matter in terms of practicality. And if you don't recognize that and you're not willing to utilize all these different elements and just train really hard on top of it, don't expect to get very far. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.